Hello, listeners. Welcome once again to YUH with Lisa, Aaron, and Phil. And this week we're talking to Randee Dawn. Who wrote two books that I'm now aware of. And we'll tell a funny little story about that. Just to fess up, I have not read the book we are talking about tonight.
You
I
didn't?
was told we were interviewing Randee Dawn. I looked up Randee Dawn and found Tune In Tomorrow. Thoroughly enjoyed it. The humor's great. The syntax is excellent. The pace was good, and the characters were fascinating.
Thank you. That is so nice
And
to hear.
I specifically enjoy those fish out of water stories.
Yeah. The
I read the wrong book, and
It's
I'm
okay.
glad I did. I bought it
glad
on
you did.
I bought it on Audible because I couldn't find the PDF he said he sent me.
Mhm.
And then it turns out,
Yeah.
The woman who did the
because when he
audio
sends the
recording.
messages about books, he doesn't always put a lot of information included,
Right.
like the name of the book.
So
That is
welcome,
helpful,
Randy.
yeah.
So yeah, we are so glad to talk to you.
Oh, good. Well, it's nice to talk to you all, and we're happy to talk about any and all books that I have my name on.
Right.
So
Great.
whatever you'd like to do, I'm here.
Like
I'm
we'll
here for you.
advertise book A and just discuss book B for the entire show.
Well, hopefully a little of this, a little of that.
Oh yeah,
you know.
I'm pretty sure that Aaron read the correct book.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Well, your Skylink is failing you, Aaron.
Yeah, his mic isn't on yet.
Yeah.
Oh, and he's gone.
Yeah, he uses
Can you hear me now?
yes.
Yep.
Yes.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
I turned off the camera when I thought it was failing for that reason. But
Oh, okay.
But,
Yeah.
So you've read the book.
I guess you didn't hear anything I've been saying.
No.
Sadly, no.
Okay, so yeah, I did read the book. It's been, I don't know, probably 7 to 10 books ago now, but
Oh my.
yeah, it was
He
the
reads
it was the
a
redheaded
lot.
fairy and the other fairy and Pedraig.
Yeah, Podrig, I think, is actually how it's said. But yeah,
I
one
knew
of those
I'd be
words.
saying it wrong.
Totally fine. Irish is one of those languages that is a little confusing for those who don't speak it.
Yeah.
I do not speak it. I just have a few
I do
words.
remember looking up a lot of words as I was going through that were all Irish words, and
Yeah.
for the most part,
We
found
looked up
definitions.
pronunciation.
Yeah, so the version that's going to be the final version will have a glossary in it so that people will not have to look
Cool.
stuff up. I think some of the phrases and words you can figure by context, but if you want like more
Yeah.
specific definitions, we've decided to put a glossary in the back.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll
was
add
reading it
pronunciations.
I was reading the
Yeah.
PDF through iBooks, and I would just, highlight the word and say look up.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because Philip asked me, how do you say sídhe? And I'm like, she.
Yes. That's one of the reasons the main antagonist is named Shiri. It's kind of a riff on she. But yeah, it's one of those words that looks like sídhe,
Yeah.
but Irish has different pronunciations. Irish is an interesting language because a little bit that I've studied, there's no real connection to other European languages, right? Like it kind of islands itself on its own in terms of being a standalone language. I think Catalonian is similar in that it doesn't
Not
connect
even
with other
Welsh?
languages. Sorry?
Not even Welsh?
I think Welsh is its own thing. Welsh doesn't have
It's
any
its own
vowels, for
weird,
example.
other weird, different thing.
Right.
There's Scots Gaelic and there's Irish Gaelic, and so there are similarities in those.
Mm-hmm.
But the Gaelic in general is kind of this islanded language. There's pockets of places that will be similar. I mean, Brittany in France, there's a connection there. Welsh is not totally out of the loop, but Welsh is different, there's old dialects that they used to speak in Cornwall, for example. Cornish is a language as well. So, but the Irish language also comes with it all this historical baggage, because when Ireland was being colonized by the British, one of the first things they wanted to do was stamp out the language. You have to speak English, you have to speak this, and it's illegal not to. And if we catch you, you're going to be in trouble. So it was kind of stomped out for a long time. And there's a reference in The Only Song Worth Singing where the character Ciaran sort of is like, they made me go to these hedge schools and learn Irish, and it doesn't have any use anywhere else. And that's not my opinion; that's his opinion. But when there were pockets of Irish, especially in the West Coast, that were doing their best to keep the language alive, and they were called hedge schools because they were often held like in the sort of green areas, the hedges, the trees, in the hidden away areas. So when he says hedge schools, that's a reference to the secrecy of the schools they used to have to.
They did the same thing with the Native Americans here in the United States.
Exactly, and there's
with the Ukrainians and.
Yep. If you take away the language of the people, you take away their ability to describe the world, and you make them say the world in your own terms. And I think one of the most common things people hear about in terms of Irish is that there's no words for yes and no. I mean, it's sort of like it is or it isn't. There's not a specific yes or specific no. So that I think is really fascinating if you think about how that would shape your worldview. Mm-hmm. Something is or something isn't, but there isn't a yes, no. So I thought that was very interesting. I'm sure there's going to be people who are going to listen to this and they'll be like, look, I know more Irish than you do, and I'm going to tell you you're wrong, but this is how I understand it anyway.
It begs the question. So did you have to teach yourself a lot of this stuff? I mean, did require copious amounts of research, or are you like steeped in Irish culture? I mean, do you have family members that is it part of your background?
So, I mean, technically it's not part of my background, at least as I was growing up. This is another conversation we can have if you like, but I am adopted and I grew up very culturally Jewish. But in my explorations, I have discovered that I do have Irish background, but I sort of became enamored with Irish culture long before I even knew that. It was just kind of like, it just felt really familiar to me in some ways. Mm-hmm. And over the years, as I was writing this book, because this book is a very long time in the making, I have gone to Irish speakers. Once I've written the book and I knew which phrases I wanted to use and which words I wanted to use, I've had them vetted by professors of Irish. I've had all the way down, everything from professors of Irish to people who do public radio shows about Ireland to people on Fiverr, where I hired most recently to be like, can you just vet this for me one more time? So there's a lot of different ways to say a lot of the different words. Different regions of Ireland might say things differently. So undoubtedly, I have screwed up somewhere, but I have done my level best and all mistakes are mine. But yeah, that's kind of how I decided to do it. Was I wanted to see where I could fit things, what words would make sense, what would give you the flavor of people who speak Irish, but not get too bogged down in a book where people are almost certainly going to be all English readers, right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I wanted to do with it.
Yeah, it's kind of like here in Cincinnati, we have what we call spaghetti sauce.
Okay.
Whereas my sister-in-law from Long Island calls it gravy.
Calls it gravy? I would not think to put gravy on my spaghetti, but okay, that would be.
That's an Italian American thing for spaghetti
That's
sauce.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I mean, where you all live, you probably say pop, right? I mean, I say soda, you say pop. Is that correct?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. So there's all sorts of different regionalisms.
And then she's not only from Long Island, but she's also an ostentato.
My husband is from Long Island. He always makes that joke whenever he meets somebody. He's like, I'm from Long Island.
Yeah. Emphasis on the G.
Yeah, I can't.
Like it's
I don't
one
think
word.
I can physically say it not that way anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Yeah, she's from Lake Ronkonkoma.
Oh, right. Okay. Yeah, I certainly know about Ronkonkoma for sure. My husband's from a little bit closer to the city than that. But yeah, Long Island has its own culture for sure.
Oh, yeah.
You've been to Ireland, I assume.
I have. I did a study abroad when I was in college in London, and when I was done, I then spent a whole month, going around Ireland, totally on the cheap, living in hostels, riding bikes whenever I could, taking buses that would just
Oh,
wind around for hours.
that's
Um,
cool. That's cool. That's
That still sounds kind of great.
yeah,
yeah.
and I've been back a couple of times since, but like that was my most extensive experience there. I had this idea that I wanted to find a field where it was just green to the horizon. And when I
Right.
found that field, I made sure I took a picture. So I have this wonderful picture of just beautiful, smooth grass all the way. And when in the
I
book, when I talk about the green place, the idea that you go into the fairylands through the portal to the green place, that's kind of the picture I have in mind. Is this big green to the horizon?
Where the
Is
keyboard
that like
player goes when
framed
he's
or?
jamming.
Yeah, exactly. That's where he disappears. He closes his eyes and he is there, and the green place becomes what you need it to be. So it starts out semi-blank, and then as you need things, or you're sort of like, I need to see this thing. Why aren't there any trees? Oh, wait a minute, now there's a tree. That's kind of how that develops in there.
I had ideations of doing something like that when I was a kid. I was like, I'm gonna go to England. I'm gonna explore all these castles in the countryside and stuff. I'm gonna get a bike or whatever, and just And in my mind, England is like I don't know. Maybe I'm imagining it was as it was like in the 1500s or something, where it was just a wide open expanse of foliage and green beauty and all this stuff, and you'd be sleeping under the
You
stars.
can find
But you
parts
don't
of it.
Yeah, but you probably,
Hey,
you get over here, you find out they got homelessness, they got, they
Mm,
got problems,
of course
they
they
got
do.
toxic waste and
yeah.
so, but
There's
that
no
kind of,
perfect world, but both of those
yeah.
countries are very beautiful in their own ways. I've done hiking. I did the Hadrian's Wall walk. Do you know what we all know what
Mm.
Hadrian's Wall is? Should I explain?
Aaron,
Yeah, I know it
Aaron's
is, but
our
go ahead.
hiker.
okay.
So Hadrian's Wall is
Fine.
basically when the Romans came and conquered England, they tried to get into Scotland and they just couldn't quite conquer the Scots. So they created a literal wall named after Emperor Hadrian that stretched from Newcastle all the way to the west. If you picture what England looks like, and you imagine that little pinch point right before you get to Scotland, there was a wall. Most of the wall has been dismantled over the years and everything, but there is an entire walk where you can walk across the country. And I did that one time, and that's actually was really amazing because
About how
you
long
could
does that
go for
take?
hours and it would be empty and quiet and farmland and all.
So it was
How
pretty,
long does that take?
I took a week. I mean, I can do like maybe 10 miles a day. After that, I start to get real tired. Some people can probably do 15 and make it shorter, but I took a week. Basically, I flew into Newcastle, got driven to the other side, and then walked my way back, staying at different B&Bs and such along the way.
Mhm.
Okay. I was
And
wondering if you were camping or,
yeah,
'cause
no,
that makes a
I can rough
difference
it,
if
but
you're
not that much.
carrying camping gear.
Aaron would love that. You'd be right in, you would be in ecstasy doing that, right, Aaron?
Yeah, I do that here, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. They have some really great trails. I have never actually done long distance hiking in Ireland. I biked around what's called the Ring of Kerry in
Mhm.
Ireland,
Mhm.
but I didn't actually
I
walk a
mean,
hike there. I think that both countries now have really good trails and are set up for the walking culture. In England, I think in Ireland, but I'm not sure, definitely in England, they have this thing called, I think it's just right of way or right to cross or something, but you can walk through anybody's land essentially.
Yeah.
It's designed to be, it's not like you're trespassing at some point. As long as you're not doing something you're not supposed to do, you have the free permission to walk across people's land.
That's nice.
like
I
an
know
easement.
here at least in Cincinnati, they are creating more walk/bike paths,
Excellent. Very
like
glad to hear
a
that.
lot more.
Yeah.
In fact, their goal is to create a bike path that goes all the way from Cincinnati to Lake Erie.
Ooh,
And then also a bike path that goes from like Southwest Ohio to Chicago.
I
excellent.
just hope they
And
don't pave the
like
damn thing.
maybe, huh?
I just hope they don't pave it.
Um, yeah,
Parts of
they
it at least are
yeah,
paved. I don't know.
parts of it
Oh,
are
no,
paved. I
all
think
the
the
trails
plan
around
is
there
for
are
the
paved.
bike path that goes all the way to be paved.
Mhm.
There is a hiking trail that
Mhm.
goes through most that you can get through like from the Ohio River to Lake Erie.
Yeah,
That's
but
not
I'd
fully
much rather
paved,
be
but
on
it's
like
like these are the
a
directions.
dirt single track on a mountain bike than a paved.
I understand that, but you are a different person than many.
Yeah.
I'm
No,
not a
sure,
mountain biker.
yeah,
I'd
No,
rather
I
have a
mean,
regular
I
touring bike.
admire your athletic, I admire that about you,
Yeah.
yeah.
genuinely.
Yeah.
So, Randy, we should talk about the book a little bit. So we're talking about an Irish band from Dublin.
Mhm.
They had a three member band. We have Malachi, is it Ciaran,
Ciaran.
Patrick,
Ciaran.
Yeah.
and they I felt a little bit of like a Lennon McCartney kind of symbionts between Malachi and Ciaran, and they make it big. It goes, the first chapters talk about, growing up in Dublin and their life there. But they do go, and their band is a Celtic rock band, and they do make it big and go to America. So tell us a little bit, that's a little, just a short synopsis, but
Not
flesh
that
it out a little
making it
bit.
big is defined by coming to America.
Well,
Yeah. I
for a
mean,
music band in the 90s, that was a pretty big deal.
Yeah.
yeah. So like
Ireland.
I was a music journalist during the 1990s. I started while I was still in college, and then I continued it afterward. So some of my backstage on the bus type knowledge I've tried to put into the book as much as I can.
Mhm.
And what I found was that there were a lot of labels or imprints on the labels that were willing to throw money at first time bands who only had a first album to send them around the US. It's not like they really put them in a van. They spent this money to put them in a bus, even though they didn't necessarily have a hit single in the US, or they didn't necessarily have a lot of hit singles back at home. There was a lot of investment in that. So you were getting these young bands who had never really even left their country, or if they left their country, like if they went from Ireland to the UK, for example, that's a different thing, but had never gone across the pond, and were sort of just casting these young 20 somethings into the void in a way, like get on the bus and just show up in all these cities that you've never been in before, that you've never met anybody in, that the only people you know are maybe people from the record label who are going to come up and want to do business with you. And it was really interesting to meet them because I was still very much wet behind the ears myself. I was still in my 20s. And the idea of doing that I thought was extremely brave, as well as then getting on stage and sharing your music. And I'm not a musician. I can play piano, but I don't write music or anything. And I've always been a little in awe of people who do, because although I've gone on to write about TV and film and the people who make TV and film, that's a different kind of collaborative process than most musicians have. I mean, most musicians, or especially of that time, were writing their own stuff, performing their own stuff, and then going out and playing it. They weren't necessarily getting 7 or 8 people to write a song for them and a DJ, and then recording it in separate rooms or something, and then maybe getting on the road eventually. It's a very different music industry than we have now. So it was fascinating to me to meet them because I was a little in awe of them. I had so many nosy questions about how it all came to be. And sometimes they were really nice, and they would let me, go to sound check, or I would get to go back after the show and we'd have a drink or something like that. And occasionally there was one time when I got to ride on the bus with a band for a while for an article that I was writing. So getting all of that inside knowledge really fed me wanting to tell this story. And then I stumbled across this folklore book that the poet W.B. Yeats had put together, Irish Fairy and Folk Tales. And he had talked all about the different types of fairies in the culture. And I just those two things came together. There's a character in the book named Shiri, who is the fairy mistress. The Irish is Lein She, but that means fairy mistress. And she's, in the book that Yeats wrote, he says, she's the reason the poets die young, because she will inspire them. She'll get them to write really great stuff, but then she kind of sucks their life out as she's doing it. So they all drink themselves to death by the time they're 30 or something. And when I read that, I thought, who are the modern poets? Of course, we have poets, but I thought, well, rock musicians are kind of our modern poets.
Yeah, they're the ones the fairies would be more attracted to.
Yeah, exactly. So the idea that she would glom on to a rock musician who seemed interesting and ambitious, as Ciaran proves that he is. He thinks he can do the whole thing all by himself, as we learn in an early chapter. He's ripe territory for her, and she's sort of like, yeah, let's do this. And we see how that progression goes. So the question then becomes, how do you get rid of a fae who's interested in you before she kills you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
the question of the hour there for sure.
Yeah.
So,
So
who are some of these? You got to ask now. Who are some of these bands that you encountered?
let's see. So they might have been like very small bands also. Like I don't know how people
Sure.
know so many. I mean, people probably will recognize the name Blur. There was a band called
Oh,
Blur
yeah.
that came through. They were on their first tour. They were pretty big in England at the time. Damon Albarn was the singer. He went on to do Gorillaz and other stuff. He was one of the bands. Another early band I interviewed was a band called the Primitives, and they had a single in the U.S. called Crash. And they sort of were blippy, but they were a lot of fun. They were one of the first bands I ever interviewed, and got to like ride in the limousine back to the hotel with and everything. The band that I got to go on the road with, for example, was Radiohead. They had
Oh, wow.
put out they were on their second album by this point, and they had some success from the song "Creep." But nobody knew if they were going to be anything more than a one-hit wonder, and so they were kind of on the low key in terms of the size of the venues they were playing. And this magazine I was writing for, called Alternative Press, said, we want you to do a cover story. You're going to go on the road with them for a couple of days. And I didn't actually ride in the bus because the bus has a no girls rule allowed, which I think I also put in the book. But I did go on the Amtrak with them. They did travel on an Amtrak from one place to the next. I showed up at several different shows. I got to go to several different backstage sound checks and such. And then I interviewed
Kid
them.
A. What's the second album?
The second album is The Bends.
The bands.
And that was right before they ended up putting out OK Computer,
OK
and OK
Computer.
Computer kind of vaulted them into legendary status. But I wrote the article. It was several thousand words. I had a great time. Like I said, I felt like I got a real sense of how a band works by hanging out with them for so long, because they're very individual people. But then when they come together, it's like a whole different unit. It's like a sixth person is formed almost. And I was so happy to write that article, and they liked it a lot. Actually, they liked it so much that the PR person called me back and said they really liked the article. They want to send you a present. And I'm like, that's great. I've never actually heard a band that wanted to send me a present. And when it arrived, it was this gold record hanging here on my wall. It's
Nice.
a gold record from the Bends from Radiohead.
That's awesome.
And has my name on
Sweet.
it.
I was wondering where the gold record came from. It was going to come
Quite
up.
an artifact, yeah.
Absolutely, one of my proudest possessions, I got to tell you.
I can imagine.
So yeah, so
I'm glad
I mean,
didn't blurt it out and let it come out naturally.
I will. You don't have to drop a hat. I will be happy to tell you about my gold record at any time.
Yeah.
So that to me
I
was
was
like
like,
the most.
you said, well, I'm not a musician. And I'm like, well, what's that gold record behind it?
There's a story in there.
Yeah.
So that was really very exciting. I got to go interview Tori Amos, the Laws, who had a song called There She Goes. A lot of people know the remake version that Sixpence None the Richer did, but the original was the Laws. A band called the Beautiful South, who are very big in England. So these were of varying level bands, but they often had their own bus, and they clearly had a budget behind them. And that's kind of what I wanted to recreate with the band in the book, because a lot of American bands who go on the road for the first time, they just sit in a van together, right? And it all smells funny, and they've got everything cramped in there, and they sleep on the floor in the hotel rooms. But the bands that I was meeting were actually fairly well funded for first time bands. They had multiple hotel rooms, for example. And they had road managers and all sorts of things. So that was, I think it's very different now, the music industry, than it was then, but that's not a surprise. It's been many years since the 1990s, but we're sort of fascinated with 80s and 90s music still, because the industry has changed so much.
That's part of the time where after the fact, the bands found out that all of those things that they were getting, they were going to be paying for. They were taking in the end.
Oh yeah.
You know?
Right.
It's-
Yeah.
So they ended up with nothing. A lot of
Mhm.
them.
The producer, not the, yeah, they would get
The label.
ripped off. Yeah, the
Right,
label would rip
right.
them off.
Yeah.
But
Or, it's
so
it's
yeah,
not, yeah.
it
It's not all
seems
that different from publishing. I mean, when you publish, people are just like, "Oh, you got an advance. You must be wealthy." And it's like, "No, you have to understand. It's called an advance because you still now you have to sell enough books to pay them back for this advance that you got. You're not
Right.
getting royalties until that advance is paid back." Same thing with musicians. Well, yeah, we'll get you a nice bus. We'll fly you here and there, and you don't earn anything off of your music until that stuff is paid back in some fashion.
yeah.
Right, right.
I was just gonna say today it seems like music is become like a nostalgia or a cottage industry for podcasting. It's like perfect for, of course we still like to listen to the music, but we love to talk and reminisce about the eras of music too. We're talking about the book is concentrating on the 90s.
Yeah.
And I think they said the Celtic rock explosion.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, there was U2 in the 80s and then of course the 90s, but they sort of ushered in this often anthemic mixed with folk, mixed with rock sound that to varying degrees other bands then created themselves. And it was interesting to see that there was some real success. I mean, the Cranberries had a huge hit. There are a lot of bands that were then inspired, like who were from Boston, who created their own sounds. There's Boston, New York, a lot of East Coast bands sort of really were influenced by that. So wasn't maybe as big as some trends, but it certainly was a big trend in the 90s for a bunch of
Well, one of
bands.
the questions I had was about U2. I was like, U2 has become so massive and almost, I guess, marketed. Uh, do you really consider that part of like this Celtic rock movement? I always thought that they were a little bit more corporate or something than say like Dropkick Murphys or
Sure.
something,
Well, U2,
more
U2
pop
really got
oriented.
started in I think U2's earliest album was the late
Early
70s,
80s.
early 90s. So they kind of they started small. It's not like they were starting as corporate whatevers. And they continued to put out album after album that got critically acclaimed and started winning Grammys. I mean, they really sort of had this very slow roll through the 80s, and then by the time they hit the 90s, it became about stadiums because they put on such an amazing live show, and then they had all sorts of lights and screens, and they wanted to make it a whole experience. And that is a very different band than was playing small venues or even Red Rocks in Colorado, which is one of their famous concerts in the 80s. I don't think of them as necessarily corporate shills or anything like that, certainly not compared to some other bands. I think that they embraced being big because that was their sound, and they did well in front of a stadium. Bono kind of became bigger than anything else with his charity and his he did a lot of speaking out on politics and things. But I think in general, their hearts remain pure. I don't really feel like they're a good example of corporate rock. Exactly.
But I think they made a calculated mistake when they uh, signed up with Apple to have that album deployed.
Oh yeah,
to
Red,
iPhone on
the Red
plane.
Apple that came out, right?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, that's on my phone. I
everybody
looked at
found everybody found that album on their
Yeah, it's still on my
iPod
phone.
suddenly.
I still
Yeah, look, every
I have
anybody
an
who's
iPhone.
anybody who's been around as long as a band like U2, there's definitely mistakes, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no perfect
Oh, yeah.
band. I mean, I would point to something like REM. Like REM should never have signed with Warner Brothers, but also, can I deny them being able to cash in? I mean, they'd spent so long as a small, perfect indie band. When they signed to Warner Brothers, it's like, yes, you should get that money, but it's a different band kind of after
But
that.
it's definitely
Yeah.
different. If you look like at the old, I don't know their canon that well, but like the really original stuff, like Sunday Bloody Sunday and In the Name of Love, that stuff that seemed like a different band altogether than the one.
That's not the real early
Like,
stuff
with-
either, really.
What's that, Aaron?
That's not the real early stuff either, really.
Well, there's stuff that predates that. Yeah,
Well,
more-
Sunday
Yeah.
Bloody
probably-
Sunday. Sunday
Go
Bloody
to,
Sunday
like-
is relatively early. I mean, there's the
Yeah.
Boy album. There's
Go
New
to
Year's
Boy,
Day.
yeah.
If you go way back and you find Bono with a mullet, That's early U2.
Okay.
And that's before we were calling it a mullet, but it is a mullet.
Mhm.
Um, I think every band has to evolve. If you don't evolve, you stagnate, right? I mean, David Bowie was not the same in 1972 as he was in 1992 when he's doing
Well,
Tin
that's for
Machine.
sure. Yeah.
So evolution, I think, is important. Depending on how you evolve, is the choices you make determines how you're going to evolve.
And some of our biggest groups, celebrities, stars in
Mhm.
music have evolved regularly.
Yes.
I mean, Madonna, Cher,
Mhm.
they've changed. They didn't stagnate.
Right. I think it's about retaining your core, but also finding new costumes to put on, new styles to approach, new ways of doing things while still retaining your core. There are some bands that do very well kind of doing the same thing over and over again. I mean, one of my favorite bands is very different than anything we've just talked about is the Pet Shop Boys. But I can't say they necessarily have done a whole lot of evolving and growth. I mean, they're kind
No.
of doing the same thing that they did in
Their thing is their
1984.
thing.
And I still like it. I'm happy with it. But I wouldn't say that they've evolved exactly. Whereas there
Kind
are
of a
bands that take
post-punk.
chances
Yeah.
and you fall down sometimes and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
But I didn't mean to
Babe,
spend so
I
much
got to
time.
buy some tickets here because Fish announced a West Coast tour and they're doing 3 shows at the Hollywood Bowl.
Oh, you'll be all over
You're
that
gonna go to all three or just one?
as many as you can get.
Probably Friday and Sunday, like I did last
Yeah.
year.
Based on my experience with Fish, you don't even have to leave the venue. It's just going to be one long continuous show.
Yeah, I've been to 21 so far.
Just take your
I see that.
laptop there and work from the
Right, exactly.
stage left there.
It's like, you're supposed to be at home. No, I'm supposed to be working remotely. Wherever I am is home.
Yep. There you go.
So the reason I spent so much
Wish I
time on
could get away
YouTube, have
with
you ever
that.
seen the movie called Killing Bono?
I have not seen that. No, I think I've heard of it, but I
The
don't
book
know.
kind of reminded me of that because even though your band, the band in your book kind of makes it big, it's all about a number of bands that were like in the shadow of U2 back, when they were making it. And
Yeah.
I just kind of imagined, Malachi and Ciaran and Patrick or something kind of, haunting the street, the atmosphere there that U2 occupied during that time. So
Yeah, but by the way,
That's a good movie.
it's Ciaran. It's not a big deal, but it's Ciaran, just so you know.
yeah.
I think Ciaran is actually a name that we do use over here sometimes, but it tends to be spelled with a K, like Kieran, Ciaran. But anyway, yeah, I mean, when you have something that massive, it's easy for a lot of other folks to get lost in the dust because people are like, well, we have our token Irish band, right? But I also think that a rising tide can lift all boats. So I think that one of the reasons we have as many bands that came out of Ireland, even if you don't necessarily know that they came out of Ireland, it's because of that success. Ireland was going through a lot of changes in the 80s and 90s. I mean, they were dealing with the Troubles still at that point. There were terrorist bombings going on. There was, strife between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. I mean, there was all this other stuff going on. The idea that you'd have rock bands coming out of all of that was maybe not people's first priority when they were thinking of Ireland. So it's sometimes easy to forget that even though there's peace now, there wasn't always peace, and there was a lot going on beyond just can you play a guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you write, obviously you love music, you've been around music, and you write about music. Do you find it challenging trying to depict music in words? Because like the music that appeals to us, to me at least, it's seldom the lyrics that appeal to me. It's usually the melodies, the riffs, the hooks, that type of thing. Is that a challenge as a writer to try to capture the magic of the band musically?
Yeah, I think we can probably all of us in some way have heard that phrase about writing about music is like dancing about architecture. It's not it's hard to use one medium to talk about another medium. And for me with the book, I think I do reasonably little description of what their music sounds like. Like I think there's a short description, but I didn't want to get bogged down in this sounds like this, or this is the equivalent of this, or this is, what I wanted to do was portray the energy, the feeling, what it's like to be on that stage. I have seen some bands where it goes on for hours and you don't even feel like it's like hours. I mean, I will just wear myself out as a participant in the audience because you can feel that back and forth energy. And I can only imagine what it's like to be the band up on stage, but I've certainly talked to enough bands about what that feels like. And again, going back to the Radiohead thing, the idea that you are individuals, but you become something different and bigger when all your wires cross and you're on stage together. I feel like if you're in a concert like that's probably the closest approximation to real magic we have in this world. I've seen some shows that just feel like they are elevated. They are something beyond, and music does that to us in a way that almost nothing else does. I am not a Swiftie, but I did watch the Eras tour, the movie version, and just watching how they react, the emotion that they react to Taylor Swift, the emotion she gives back to them, and then the spectacle on stage. I'm thinking this is another example of like that real life magic. You don't have to like Taylor Swift. You don't have to like the fact that it's not a classic rock show with, 4 people on guitar and bass and drums and all that. But I feel like there's something bigger than the rest of us when you're in a really good show.
Kind of a magic.
Exactly, magic. So that's what I really wanted to portray, as opposed to describing chords and riffs and fingerings and all that kind of stuff.
Well, you do see that in like reviews. You see where sometimes writers will get overly obsessed with trying to capture the artistry of the work, and they become ridiculous. They become like
You
ridiculed
should
by
read fish
podcasters.
reviews on fish.net, dude.
Does that
You
go
don't know
on
the
there?
half of it.
Well, I mean, that's it. The jam bands. I mean, there's this. Like if you try to visualize the sound of of some of his jams, it's
Mhm.
like, it's just, crazy, colorful, all kinds of shapes and stuff
Yeah,
like
it
that.
gets you into headspace. It's a different headspace once it's like a jam band. That's another example. I think that's an excellent example.
I think that's
just
kind of, maybe you could almost like rock and roll laser light shows where
Mhm.
the music and the lights are linked,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
And they do that with Christmas lights too.
Oh,
Right. Yeah.
for
I mean,
the
there's a bunch of ways to sort
Yeah.
of make it a 3D experience or a different kind of sensory experience. But yeah, when it comes to writing about it, this is also how I feel about reviews. Somebody else said this is not original, but somebody once told me that book reviews are for readers, not for authors. If I'm going to write a review, the kind of review I want to read, whether it's about my book or something else, is I just want somebody to tell me what the book is about, what other people it maybe is reminiscent of, and let me decide if it's good or well written or the characters or whatever, because
Right.
that's that subjective thing
Right.
that you may be right, but I don't need you to tell me that. Just get me in the door and I'll make my decision after that. So that's kind of how I feel about with the music. I could describe the music to you and you could say, oh, I don't like that. I don't like that kind of music. But I want this to be a more universal book. So whether or not you like Celtic rock music, you can still read this book and graft on your own favorite concert and the emotions you
Yeah.
had when
Right.
I will only write positive reviews. So if I read a book
Mhm.
and I really like the book,
Mhm.
I will review it. But if I don't really like the book, I'm not going to foist my negative opinion on someone else.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
too many times somebody said something negative about something that influenced me when I was younger.
Mhm.
And then I would read the book because I read something else by that author. And it'd be like, oh, yeah, this was good. I liked this for this
Yeah.
reason,
To each their own. Everybody's got a different taste.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's where blurbs, I'll read a blurb, but I won't read a
Right.
review.
Right. Same here.
Until
Blurbs
after I've
are
read
very
the book.
important. Yes.
Yes.
We got a great blurb for this book, which I think is, they said that it mixes A Court of Thorn and Roses with Daisy and the Six. So if you like those books, this might be the book for you.
I actually haven't read Daisy and the Six yet. We did watch the series. I think we watched the series in about one day.
You must
I
have liked
think
it.
It was a weekend.
it was a
Yeah.
weekend, yeah.
But it was
and
awesome.
We
Yeah,
finished
really.
it. I mean, we rushed through that, and then it's like no, because I don't think there's going to be more.
Well, if
Yeah.
they do it, it'll just be them sitting in a psychiatrist's office. You know, it'll be really boring. But
Right.
Yeah,
Well, not and
that
not to
was
get too ahead of
really-
ourselves, but with The Only Song Worth Singing. So The Only Song Worth Singing is a standalone book. If you read it, you can
Yeah.
see that it comes to a
Okay.
natural conclusion.
Okay.
But I have another book coming out later this year in August from the same publisher called Leave No Trace. Again, another standalone book, but it's another one where musicians are involved and we go to the green place. And it kind of expands that green place idea a little bit more. I have the idea for a third book that actually will kind of connect all of this. So, like, if this is a book that you like in August, Leave No Trace is another book you might like, and then cross fingers, there's a third one at some point, all standalones.
Right.
Awesome.
That sounds good.
Well,
yeah.
now, will there be a sequel to Tune In Tomorrow?
So yeah, with Tune In Tomorrow, which I know you've read it, but how about I do the elevator
Yeah,
pitch
what's
real
that
quick
one
just for your
about?
audience? So Tune In Tomorrow is about a reality TV show run by mythical creatures for mythical creatures starring humans.
Mhm.
It is silly and punny and funny and backstagey in a way that The Only Song We're Singing is not.
Sounds kind of Vonnegut-y.
Sorry?
Sounds kind of Kurt Vonnegut-y to me.
Oh, thank you. That's a pleasure. Thank you so much. That would be an honor to be talked about in that same breath.
Be a
So
Salfamadorian or however you pronounce it.
So yeah, the Tune In Tomorrow, it does stand alone, but I actually have two more books that will be coming out, at least two more in that same universe. I'm contracted for two right now, and those will be silly and punny and funny in the sort of universe of what the Fae would watch for TV and movies if the Fae were watching TV and movies. So that book, I have three books coming out this year, which is like, oh my God, what?
Wow.
But in the fall, that
Impressive.
book will be coming out. That's called We Interrupt This Program.
Oh,
so-
cool. I like that.
So if you like that, that's another one you'll like.
So
I'm
we're
very
talking-
much a fan of this whole idea of books that are in the same universe, as opposed to this is the first, the second, the third, and you know,
Yeah.
I can't
Right.
catch up.
Like,
Terry Pratchett did that with like all
I
the
was,
different.
I was about to say it sounds kind of Pratchett-y. You got the witches and you got the City
Yeah, you
Watch.
can read them in any order, but they kind of have overlap, and I feel like that's
The
I like that
luggage.
as a reader and as a writer.
Yeah, one of my favorite characters in the Pratchett universe is the luggage.
yes, exactly.
That's fine. So we're talking to Randee Dawn, author.
Not death. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, right. Not
That's
author
not
of
your
The Only
favorite
Song
character.
Worth Singing.
Mhm.
Yeah, do yourself a favor and read that book, or
I know I will.
yeah, or wait for
I know I
the
did.
movie to show up on Hulu or wherever the streaming service will be. But
Yeah.
we should mention real quick. You also have a day job as a journalist. That's very
do.
interesting as well. Where you
Yeah, you're busy.
yeah,
Mhm.
I read your article on Jerry Springer. That kind of hit home, because we
Oh,
all know
yeah.
Jerry Springer and what kind of
Ohio
brought
and
him-
Cincinnati and all that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Former mayor.
Yeah, he was our mayor.
and TV
Right.
Channel 5 host, where his like commentaries at the
Yeah.
end of the episode became like, required. Everybody,
Required listening.
yeah, people come in.
That's where that whole, sum up of the episodes of his TV show came from. He started that here in Cincinnati.
That is what I saw exactly. Yeah, he was such an interesting person because I got the impression that he really wanted to do good in the world, and I think he had, but he was also a very flawed person.
Yeah.
And it seems like without getting into politics, it seems like until recently we really insisted that everybody had to have no flaws in order to be elected.
Ridiculous.
Well,
And-
he got past the prostitution scandal.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but he didn't
Did you
get
know
like
about that?
reelected, right? Like
Right.
he went on
I
to a
think he
different career.
did.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wasn't that before but wasn't that earlier in the 70s before he was?
Yeah. He paid a
Um,
prostitute with a
I
check.
think he
With a
right,
check.
but that's when he was a city councilman. That's before he was mayor.
Yeah, that was before he was
That's
mayor.
true.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
then I think there was
My
another
dad had a
scandal.
limerick about it, actually. I'll only
Was
say
there,
it since you're Irish,
Yeah.
or since the Irish is the subject.
We'll have to look that
There
up.
once was a councilman named Springer who took a young whore out to ding her. He said, "What the heck? I'll pay her by check," and now his dick's in the ringer. That's how.
Oh, wow.
Oh boy.
Look at Aaron
Yeah.
bringing the
Pulled that up from what, 40 years ago?
yeah.
Yep.
I do believe that
Oh.
his marriage suffered from that.
I only
but
have to
his
believe a couple
political
words
career
too.
was
That's
fine.
amazing.
You know what was really interesting is as I was doing that article, I couldn't find confirmation whether or not the marriage survived his entire life or if they actually split, because half of the places I would say they
I thought
divorced
it
and half of
did,
them would
but
say
I
they
don't know.
didn't. And
I thought he married Norma.
No, Norma Rashid is co-host. No,
Yeah, okay, that was just
that's his TV wife.
yeah.
right, there you go.
Well, ironically, we do
He
have
he
a man
had
and
a
wife
special
hosting the
needs
news now.
daughter.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, because there's actually the Springer School
Yeah.
here in Cincinnati,
Right.
and it's for kids with special needs, and also it kind of does a combo thing. It's Montessori style, it's special needs, and it's like smarter kids that have social issues.
I
You know
see.
what? I
Right.
bet he'd been he'd have been a brilliant governor or something, because he took this like total disaster in his life, and he wound up having a career that was like phenomenal and became
Right.
massively wealthy, even though, and you got the feeling, even though he hosted these crazy shows, he somehow managed to stay kind of above the fray. Like he was always the guy that was looking at it
He
askance.
still
Like,
cashed the checks.
Yeah, he was the daddy in the room. I think there was the reason I was writing this. I'm
Yeah.
sorry. The reason I was writing this in the first place is that there was a Netflix documentary that came out. I think it was a 2 or 3 part documentary that
Oh
came out.
wow, on Jerry Springer.
Yeah, but it focuses specifically on the show. It doesn't really get into his prehistory. And so we were writing about that, and then I talked to a Chicago-based critic who had covered him at the time and covered all the talk shows that were in Chicago at the time, and he had a lot to say that was really interesting. But it's this guy who really wants to try and do good, but is extremely flawed. Reminds me of somebody like Eliot Spitzer out of New York.
Yeah.
He was the governor for a period. He misused some money, but like he had really progressive, bold ideas, and then just a stupid thing
right.
ends up bringing him down, and it's just
Right.
Ironically, today it probably wouldn't have probably wouldn't ended his career at all today because of what's considered normal now. Because
Yeah, that tells you a lot about how the bar has lowered, doesn't it? Though.
exactly.
Oh yeah.
All right.
Oh yeah.
So the book is The Only Song Worth Singing, Randee Dawn. Usually we close out the episode with
a little game called the Elite Eight.
The Elite Eight.
Did
Yes.
Lisa just do a Heil Tesla?
I think she did.
Did you do it? Oh, okay. Well, that's even more that I have to edit out of this one. But at least you were doing it tongue in cheek, I assume.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, but you never know what YouTube's going to decide you can't show. So
Right.
Well,
The algorithm's going to get us.
if the take over, I'm not going to say the N word. But if they take over, I'm out anyway. I mean,
Hey, who what?
because they
I
get
froze
rid
for a
of
minute.
the expensive and the handicapped and and the sick
no, we're not going to let that happen one way
and
or
the
the other.
deaf and the blind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we do this Elite Eight thing, and it's kind of just a funny thing. And if the mood hits me right, I can turn it into a decent reel to help promote the episode.
Okay.
But it takes a little bit of work. But maybe what we thought we'd do is we throw out some Celtic rock bands out there in our Elite Eight. And the idea is it's like Ginger versus Marianne, Sean Connery versus Roger Moore, that type of thing. Which do you prefer? So
Right. Sean Connery.
And it's almost completely random.
Since there's 4 of us,
she's
she's
way ahead of you.
First of all,
It's just for kicks.
we have had people say, "Oh, that's arbitrary. That's silly. I don't want to do it." So,
Yep, it is.
Randee, if you don't want to do it, that's fine.
That's okay. Hit me. You can always edit it later.
Okay.
Okay.
Do you want to be the master of ceremonies? Do you want to be the Jerry Springer, or you want me to do it at least?
Why don't I do it?
Okay.
Because I'm less of a music person and more of a reader.
All right.
Okay. And I can't listen to music while reading.
No, neither can I.
Dropkick Murphy or Flogging Molly?
So I mean, both great bands, right? The Dropkicks are out of Boston as opposed to out of Ireland specifically, but I think would have if I had to pick this. The idea is you pick one or the other. Is that
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Mhm.
If I had to pick one, I think I would go with Dropkick Murphys, just because, in addition to the great music that they've been putting out, they have been very heavily involved in charity events and raising money, especially for local Boston things. I went to school in Boston, so I'm very attached to the city. So yeah, if I had to pick one or the other, I would say Dropkick Murphys in that
Okay.
case.
Okay. Aaron?
I'll say flogging Molly just to make Phil be the tiebreak.
That's tough because I'm the one that nominated Dropkick Murphys, and I love the song Tessie because I played MVP the show, and it played on that in a loop on that show that game all the time, and I played that incessantly one year. And I like, I listened to some of the other things that they've done, but I listened to Flogging Molly tonight, a good cross section of songs, and I think it won me over. I think I'm going to go with Flogging Molly.
Oh,
Wow.
okay.
Surprise.
So, what's the next
Second
one?
selections
Yeah.
are the Levelers versus the Pogues.
So, I mean, for me, it like no shade against the Levelers at all. I've heard their music and I enjoy their music, but I mean, the Pogues, Shane MacGowan, you can't kind of original. Do we all know, like, so their original name was Pogue Mahone, which is Irish. It was an anglicization of Irish, but Pogue Mahone or Pogue Mathone means basically kiss my ass.
Huh.
And when they became the
Oh.
Pogues, it's more about kiss. But I mean, who can't love that? Who can't love the idea that Shane MacGowan, with his very poor dental appearance, could become a massive star? And so to me, the Pogues, Fairy Tale of New York, a little problematic, but still a great, great song. So much to offer from them. I just love the Pogues. I've been listening to them for a long, long time.
Okay.
Somebody just covered that on Saturday Night Live a couple weeks ago, Fairy Tale New York.
Yes, I think they did,
Hosier?
but I wasn't sure who.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm going to go Pogues too. So,
Mhm.
That
is
makes
it
it
a
easy
sweep
for
or-
me because the story that Randee told raised it in my the Pogues in my estimation a little bit, but I'm gonna go with the Levelers only because that's Thea's favorite band, so I'll throw the Levelers one vote, but
Mhm.
the Pogues move on. So
Yes.
Okay.
all right, Lee.
Yeah, I know he was going back and forth on that. Third matchup, Thin Lizzy versus the Waterboys.
So, in The Only Song Worth Singing, Thin Lizzy actually gets a bit of a shout out. There's a line in which somebody's like, "What are you going to do? Thin Lizzy covers?" When Ciaran says he's going to just do his own thing.
Mhm.
They're a great band, classic band, early stuff. They're pre-Celtic rock boom, right?
Yeah.
Phil Lynott, legend.
Mm.
But
Whiskey in the Jar, isn't that originally a Celtic song?
which one again?
Whiskey in the Jar.
Oh yes, yeah. That's a. I think that might even come out of a like a folk tune that was updated. But in this case, I have to go with the Waterboys because I actually got Mike Scott, who is the singer, to let me quote one of his songs in the book. Like at the opening quote, there's a quote before the first chapter from the song "The Big Music," because what he's talking about in a pagan place, there's so much reflective of the Irish Fae culture. And the concept of I've heard the big music and I will never be the same. Something so pure has called my name really just ties in with so many of the themes and topics that I'm talking about in the book. So getting to use that quote in the book was just,
Wow.
so,
Talk about
so
a compelling argument. Yeah.
So I have to go with Waterboys in this
See that.
case.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Who are the
Aaron?
Waterboys facing again? What's the
Thin
matchup?
Lizzy.
Thin Lizzy.
Thin Lizzy.
Yeah, I gotta go Thin Lizzy.
That makes me the tiebreaker.
Mhm.
And as wonderful as that story is, and also
Phil's going Thin.
I guess Thin Lizzy could be marginally considered a Celtic, band because they really were kind of the predecessor to heavy metal, I guess. But they were Irish, and I really love Thin Lizzy, so I'm gonna go with Thin Lizzy. Sorry, Randee.
It's okay.
It's a
I
tough
can
one.
still own the Water Boys. I'm taking them home.
Yeah,
Okay.
I
The
nominated
fourth
the Water
matchup,
Boys.
the Cranberries versus the Chords.
Cranberries
Um,
versus Coors.
Yeah. So I'm less passionate about both of those bands. I think they're great. I love that we have more female fronted bands in both cases. The Cranberries just they made the leap and had a big hit in the US, which is hard for a lot of small bands. And the sad, the singer Dolores O'Riordan sadly passed away a few years ago very suddenly. So there's that tragedy, that tragic, the poets die young again. I mean, I don't mean to compare my story with what happened with her, but there is a lot of that in the music industry that we have these very sad endings for young people. And
They get a lot of fame and a lot of money really quickly, and they make some bad choices.
there was
Bad,
something
bad.
I was reading
Some of
recently.
that.
There was something I was reading recently that said the only thing worse than being rich and famous is being poor and famous.
Mhm.
Because there are some of like these internet stars that don't get any money out of it, but for some reason become viral hits, and it's scary because you have no protections. So like if you are going to be very famous, you may as well have some money that can buffet you, but you need people who can then tell you how to use it and how to say no to certain things and all of that. And I'm not saying that's what happened with Dolores O'Riordan, but the loss of her is very sad, and unfortunately part of a pattern in a lot of musicians. And so, yeah, I'm not as familiar with all the Coors stuff, even though they're huge and they continue to perform, and God bless them, their family and everything. But I'm going to go with Cranberries on this one.
Okay.
Yeah, Cranberries. They've had more than one hit though, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. I think
There's
it's just
about three or four, I'd say.
Linger, is the one that everybody thinks of. They had Zombie.
Zombie's the only one I could get in my head right now. I couldn't come up with the name of Linger.
Well, don't make me sing it, but do you have
I know
to let
how
it
it goes.
linger?
Yeah.
That.
Right.
But
But
all
yeah, I
I could
listened
think
to
is and their tanks and their guns and their bombs.
yeah, she has the Irish accent in that song.
Yeah, exactly. Not too many British and Irish when they sing. You get the accent, but she definitely keeps it in there.
Right. I would go to Cranberries also. I listened to Linger. Lisa and I listened to it while we were eating, and I felt really melancholy about it. It's like I never really thought a lot about Dolores passing or whatever, a whole lot. But I mean, it kind of hit me with an impact a little bit there. It's like, wow, she was really, really good, really talented. So it's a sweep.
Yep.
So,
Okay. We finally agreed on something. Yay!
Yay!
so
Is
that's
that the only sweep?
final four here. What do we got, Lisa?
Number one, or the first set, Flogging Molly versus the Pogues.
Oh, are we reducing now? This is like I see. Well,
We're
because
we're
I
down
didn't
to
pick
four.
Flogging Molly before, and I did pick the Pogues, I'm sticking with the Pogues.
Okay.
Okay. Boys,
Yep. I'm
gentlemen.
going Pogues.
Oops. Okay.
I'll throw one to Flogging Molly, but it doesn't matter. The Pogues move on. So
Right.
the Pogues are in the final.
Okay. And the next group is Thin Lizzy
versus Cranberries.
Lizzy versus the Cranberries.
I mean, in that case, if we're putting those two up against each other, I would probably actually go with Thin Lizzy, just for lingering, no pun intended, lasting impact. In terms, instead of a couple of songs from the 90s, I think that they have more impact in the long term. So in that case, I would switch my vote and go with Thin Lizzy.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we're gonna sweep this one. I'm going Thin Lizzy.
Thin Lizzy it is.
Okay. So, and now for the finale. I know. That's
Pogues
awful.
versus Thin Lizzy.
I hope you leave that in.
We need to get
because
Dick
I think
Vitale.
it's quirky.
If we get Dick
No, I
Vitale
like
in here, we can really spice this up.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's the Pogues versus Thin Lizzy, I'm going to go with the Pogues just because they are more purely Celtic rock that we've been talking about. Thin Lizzy is great; they have their own legendary status. But if this is the category we're talking about, I would say Pogues is the more pure.
I'm gonna go Thin Lizzy just so Aaron has to make the decision, and I don't have the responsibility.
Okay. Yeah, if it was just which band do I prefer, it would be Thin Lizzy, but I think I'm going to go with the category argument there and pick the Celtic band.
All
Yes.
right.
All right.
There we go. There's your
So for
champion.
me, Celtic
They
Brand,
pogue you. Mwah.
out of the 8
Been pogued.
bands that we chose.
Wow. I would have handicapped that as a longer shot, but you know,
Yeah.
we have more musical expertise than I can compete with here.
All about defining your terms.
It occurs to me, Fish has covered one Radiohead song that I can think of, and it's not going to be one of the ones that you'll come up with. They covered it was during their Baker's Dozen,
Uh-huh.
which was a 13-show residency at Madison Square Garden.
Mm-hmm.
Before every show, what was it? Federal Donuts, I guess it's called.
Mm-hmm.
Gave them a few thousand donuts to give out to the everybody with a ticket, and it was a different flavor each show, and the donut flavor would dictate part of the set list. And on the lemon donut night, they did Everything in Its Right Place, which I think is the first song on Kid A.
Uh-huh.
And that's the one where he keeps saying, "Yesterday I woke up sucking on a lemon. Yesterday I woke," and it's I could have probably given you 50 guesses, and that's the last one you'd have picked for what did they cover.
Hmm.
Oh, wow.
And by the way, speaking of the Pogues, and because I mentioned about Dolores, I mean, Shane McGowan is also no longer with us. He passed on in
I
20.
don't think I realized that.
R.I.P. Shane.
Podcast eligible for our friends at Rock and Roll Heaven.
There you go.
It's unfortunate.
All right. Well, we've kept it right around an hour. Went over a little bit as we tend to do when we enjoy our conversation as much as we did this one. So,
This is a lot of fun.
but we'll just reiterate that we've been talking to Randee Dawn.
Mm-hmm.
The song is the only song we're singing.
Mm-hmm.
And go do yourself a favor, go out and get it, and maybe we'll have you back again, Randee, if
And
you're up to
We'd
it.
love
The
to
next
in the
book
fall.
is called
Leave No Trace. So
Leave
both
No
Leave No
Trace.
Trace and The Only Song We're Singing are currently available for pre-order if you go to Amazon. If you go to my webpage, randeedawn.com, there's links to all the books and how you can actually get them, whether on pre-order or not.
You anticipated our next question.
When's The Only Song Worth Singing
Where can we find
release
you?
date?
April 8th is for The Only
Okay.
Song Worth Singing, and Leave No Trace is August 16th.
Okay.
Solid date already for the second one. Cool.
We'd
All right.
love to talk to you, again.
I would love to do that.
Thanks for coming on. It's been
Thanks for
Thank you
coming.
very much for having me.
We'll let you know when it posts. We'll let
Okay.
Lou know, and she'll
Mhm.
pass it along to you.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
We have
Thanks
social-
again. Take
Twitter,
Yeah, pod.
Instagram,
Yeah, pod.
Facebook,
Yeah, pod.
website.
www.YEAH-UH-HUH.com. So let us know. Hit us back. Have a great week.